In the dead of night, the torrential rain poured down on me. I pounded on the villa's door with my fists in desperation. Marcos, open the door. As long as you promise not to divorce me, I'll do anything you want. I interrupted Marcos and his date with his lover, Charlene Barber. And when he opened the door, his face showed impatience. Are you not sleeping at this hour? I hurriedly wiped the rain off my face, handing him the cake that was already soaked. This is your favorite cake, I said with a smile. Marcos looked at it with disgust. Can this even be eaten? It's filthy. Who is it, knocking on the door at this hour? Charlene, dressed in a red, sexy nightgown, slowly walked down the stairs. She looks dirty just standing there. Marcos, stay away from her. Otherwise, you won't be touching me tonight. She tugged at Marcos's arm to pull him back. I stood there awkwardly, my clothes still dripping with water. Just put the cake on the ground, you can go now. Marcos frowned at me. Then, could you please not divorce me? I felt utterly humble, my tone filled with desperation. Is she the one you told me about? The Felicia Holland who begged you not to divorce her? Charlene looked at me, her eyes full of provocation. Felicia Holland, take a look in the mirror. How can someone 30 compare to someone 20? Marcos reached out and pinched Charlene's backside. His eyes filled with desire. I watched him with red-rimmed eyes. Marcos, you were the one who begged me to be with you. I choked on my words. Then can we not get a divorce? Let's talk about it later, Marcos said, pulling Charlene close. His gaze coldly fixed on me. On the way back, I walked while counting on my fingers. If I can just hold on for 55 more days, I will complete the task of binding the system, and my true love will get a second chance at life. The next morning, Marcos returned, seeing me lying on the sofa in the living room. He instinctively asked, "Why do you look so awful? Hurry and take your medicine." I suddenly remembered how we were when we first got together. Back when Marcos and I were still very much in love. He didn't care that I had once been with his brother. In front of everyone, he held me close, loudly announcing that he wanted to marry me. But now our relationship was on the brink of collapse. Marcos, did you ever really love me? I propped myself up to question him. Felicia, what gives you the right to question me, a woman who's been discarded by someone else? Just being able to marry me is already your blessing. I forced a bitter smile and looked at him. Then what if one day I completely leave you? He stopped smiling, his tone colder than ever. Felicia, you're not young anymore. And besides, you were once my brother's woman. Who else would dare to want you besides me? Seeing that I didn't respond, he turned and left. That night, a grand fireworks show lit up the whole city. It was for Charlene Barber's birthday, hosted by Marcos. I looked out the window, cleared my throat a couple of times. My phone buzzed with a message from Marcos. I miss you so much, I want to see you. He even attached a location. After thinking it over, I decided to go. My hand rested on the doorknob, listening quietly to the conversations inside. I used to really like Felicia, but after seeing the same face for 7 years, it gets tiring. Marcos, drunk, spoke with slurred words. Honey, I'm so afraid you'll get tired of me. Charlene pouted. You're not like her. How could she compare to you? Charlene's triumphant laughter echoed in the private room. I caught her gaze through the crack in the door, her eyes full of provocation. It turned out this message was sent to me by Charlene. At the family dinner, Marcos brought Charlene along. This made me lose face in front of the whole family. Charlene affectionately linked her arm with Marcos, smiling sweetly. I hid alone in a corner, drinking my sorrows away. When Charlene approached me, Felicia, do you recognize this necklace? I looked up at the necklace around her neck. It was the one my mother had left for me. Marcos had clearly said he lost it. Charlene, that's my necklace. You can take other things, but not this one. Charlene touched her necklace. But Marcos said it's a cheap trinket. I didn't even want it when he gave it to me. I was so furious that tears streamed down my face, and I reached out to grab it. But before I could even touch Charlene, she jumped into the pool behind her. People around began to look over. Someone's fallen into the water, quick, save her. Seeing that it was Charlene in the water, Marcos immediately jumped in. I stood there in shock. After Charlene was pulled to shore, she immediately hugged Marcos. Marcos, I'm so scared. I just wanted to check on Felicia. But she pushed me into the pool. After saying that, she started crying. The people around us began to murmur. Marcos stood up and walked toward me. Before I could react, he slapped me. I widened my eyes, looking at him in disbelief. Don't you know Charlene is afraid of water? How could you be so cruel? I touched my stinging cheek, feeling a pain in my heart as well. Marcos looked extremely angry, pointing at my nose, saying, "Go apologize to Charlene." The more I thought about it, the more wronged I felt, and tears streamed down my face. What if I say no? Divorce. I was scared, if I didn't back down, with Marcos's personality, he might force a divorce. I'm sorry, Charlene. I forced myself to hold back my grievances and lowered my head. Marcos still seemed unsatisfied and, in a fit of anger, he pushed me into the pool. The water enveloped me completely, and the chill in my heart was worse than the cold water. He knew I was afraid of water. He had promised never to take me to the beach because he was afraid of losing me. As I struggled in the water, I seemed to see Enzo Olson. He was lying on a hospital bed, weak and gasping. He reached for my hand, urging me to forget him. When I woke up again, I was in a hospital room, not knowing who had saved me. Just as I was about to get out of bed, Charlene walked in. "Felicia, how did you get up by yourself?" Charlene looked rosy and smiled as she approached, completely unlike someone who had just fallen into the water yesterday. "Do you want some water?" "I'll get you some." "No, thank you." Charlene poured herself a glass of water and then handed it to me. "I remember Marcos told me you were afraid of water, but last night," Charlene said with a smug smile. I ignored her because I didn't even have the strength to speak. Marcos also arrived, carrying a basket of fruit. Still, Charlene put aside her grievances and said she wanted to come see you, Marcos said casually, as if he wasn't the one who pushed me into the water yesterday. I kept my eyes tightly shut. "Marcos, do you really have to make this so absolute?" Marcos looked self-righteous. "You were in the wrong first. How dare you to say I am the one being extreme?" I forced a self-deprecating smile and said, "Give me 15 more days. After 15 days, I'll divorce you." A flicker of disbelief crossed Marcos's eyes, but he didn't say anything. The room fell into silence. After being discharged, I booked 2 tickets to Paris and used all my savings to buy an apartment there, just to welcome Enzo back. That night, Marcos actually came back. He walked into the living room and looked at me sitting on the sofa. "You booked 2 tickets to Paris?" Marcos turned the ring on his finger. "Which was our wedding ring. Do you want me to accompany you to Paris?" "Don't get carried away." I stood up and walked toward him. Marcos looked up at me. "I was just playing around with her, don't take it to heart." "I still love you." I laughed coldly at his words. "Marcos, in a few days, I'll be completely leaving you." Before I could finish, I was interrupted by Marcos's phone ringing. It was Charlene's voice. "Honey, why haven't you come back?" "I miss you so much." Marcos hung up the phone and hurriedly left, leaving me standing alone in the living room, stunned. Ding! This novel reminds you to click the subscribe button in the bottom right corner to read the complete novel. Today is the last day of the deadline. After today, I will be able to see Enzo Olson again. I feel both excited and nervous. The clock ticks away, and my heart beats in time with it. I place the signed divorce agreement in the living room. This is the final deadline. Whether Marcos divorces me or not no longer matters. I packed my things, waiting for Enzo to come back. As soon as he returns, I will take him to Paris, far away from this place. On my way to the hotel, I received a call from Marcos. His tone was impolite, full of sarcasm. Felicia Holland, you've got some nerve. Who allowed you to sign the divorce agreement? Do you have anywhere else to go after leaving me? You have no father and no mother, you only have me. Marcos's words felt like sharp knives stabbing into my body. I coldly replied, "Didn't you want me to divorce you? Now that I agree, shouldn't you be happy? Where are you? I command you to come home immediately. Don't make me say it a second time." I hung up on him without hesitation. After checking in, I settled in alone at the hotel. I arranged everything for when Enzo returns. Just as I was starting to doze off, there was a knock at the door. I glanced at the clock, it was 11:30 at night. I called the hotel front desk for safety reasons, and when the door opened, I saw the person's face clearly. How did Marcos find me here? He showed the hotel staff our marriage certificate, and they left. Once they were gone, he threw the signed divorce agreement in front of me. Did I agree to the divorce? Marcos tightly gripped my chin. Isn't this the result you've always wanted? I'm just giving you what you want. His grip made my cheeks ache, and I struggled to speak. Marcos continued harshly. Are you planning to hide in this hotel forever? After the divorce, do you have a home to go back to? Tears welled up in my eyes. Anyone can survive without anyone else, especially since you've allowed Charlene Barber to treat me that way these past few days. Why shouldn't I leave? Tears dripped onto Marcos's hand. I continued. You know very well that I'm terrified of water, yet you still hit me. Thinking back to our past, I couldn't help but scoff. Do you remember what you said to me back then? You said you felt sorry for me. You said you would protect me. I believed it all. Now, looking back, I feel like a dog played with by Marcos. He could pet me when he liked. But when he didn't, wagging my tail at him was useless. Marcos said nothing, just quietly looked at me. I thought he would reflect on his actions. Instead, he arrogantly spoke up. What do you want? Divorce? Felicia Holland, after all these years, I know you best. You can't bear to leave me. I chuckled lightly. Then Marcos, I have to tell you, I only want to be married to you for 7 years. After that, I can see Enzo. Today is the last day. As long as it passes midnight, we're done for good. Oh, and I married you for your brother. Marcos looked at the clock and suddenly burst into laughter. Felicia, do you take me for a fool? My brother has been dead for 10 years. I'm here watching you. Let's see what happens after midnight. There were 2 minutes left until midnight. A mechanical female voice suddenly echoed in my mind. Host, you now have 2 choices. 2 lines of text lit up before me. A. Enzo Olson comes to your world. B. You go to Enzo Olson's world. I glanced at Marcos in front of me and chose B without hesitation. Marcos watched me gesturing in midair, laughing even harder. Felicia, you don't have to pretend to be crazy just to keep me. After making my choice, a sharp pain began in my abdomen. It slowly turned into unbearable agony. Host, if you want to go to his world, you must endure his past suffering. I couldn't imagine what Enzo had gone through. He only told me, Leisha, I don't feel pain. Leisha, you need to find someone who loves you and then forget me. How could I forget you, Enzo? I was so foolish to believe your words. I thought you didn't feel pain. Marcos stood frozen in place, watching me bleed on the ground. He couldn't find his voice for a long time, until I was on the brink of death. He held me in his arms. Felicia Holland. Blood kept pouring from my mouth. Marcos panicked, frantically trying to wipe it away. Just a moment ago, he had the demeanor of a superior. Now, his hands were trembling violently. What did I do wrong? Why treat me like this? Or did you think I would never leave you? Marcos interrupted my words, tears falling onto my face. I thought what you said was just in anger. I thought you were trying to keep me. I was wrong. You need to get better. I lost my mind for a moment. Please don't leave me. Marcos's voice was choked with emotion. Even the arms that held me seemed to have lost strength. I was just playing around with Charlene Barber. I didn't mean it seriously. You are still the most important to me. Marcos, what's the use of saying this now? My voice was so weak, the taste of blood filling my mouth. I almost used my last breath to say, I didn't push Charlene Barber into the water. Marcos tightened his grip on my hand, suddenly realizing something. Where's the ring? Where's your wedding ring? You threw it out the window a long time ago, have you forgotten? I was now gasping for breath, utterly exhausted. My hands fell down and never been raised again. My soul left my body and slowly floated up into the sky. Looking down at everything in this room, I questioned the system. Why haven't I gone to Enzo's world yet? I couldn't wait any longer. The host needs Marcos Olson to sign the divorce agreement for your story with him to come to a proper end. Only then can I smoothly send you to Enzo Olson's world. Before I could react, I felt a jolt in my soul as Marcos picked me up and ran out of the hotel. He placed me in the back seat of the car. What should have been a half-hour journey took Marcos only 10 minutes. He rushed me to find a doctor, holding my bloody body. He knelt down, pleading with the doctor to save me. When I saw my own corpse, my heart trembled. Marcos was standing at the emergency room door, his hands stained with my blood. I saw his chest rising and falling, looking utterly disheveled. The doctor from the emergency room came out shortly after. Marcos staggered over. Doctor, has my wife woken up? The doctor sighed. She had no breath when she was brought in. Please accept my condolences. Marcos shook the doctor desperately like a madman. Impossible. That's impossible. I'll offer 100 million, I'll pay you to save her. Hearing Marcos's words made me laugh. Is a life measured by money? Marcos knelt on the ground in despair. When the body was covered with a white sheet and pulled out, he rushed forward and yanked the sheet away. Are you done playing? Get up right now. Felicia, get up. My face was pale and frightening, devoid of life. Come home with me. He picked me up, my hand hanging in the air. Marcos carried me home like this. He laid me on the bed and gently kissed my forehead. Marcos held my body, covering his face and weeping. But all that responded to him was a cold corpse. Even so, Marcos continued to talk to me. Do you know? The first time I saw you, you were following my brother, and from that moment on, I quietly watched you. Later, when I heard my brother wouldn't live long, you have no idea how happy I was at that time. Because you were finally going to be mine. I couldn't believe it in the air, it turned out to be premeditated. As Marcos spoke, he started to laugh. Forgive me for treating you this way these days. Can you stop joking with me, please? Marcos, isn't this exactly what you wanted? People only learn to cherish what they have after losing it. Because when you are by their side, they will never think you would leave. Over time, it becomes even more taken for granted. Tonight, the rain is pouring down heavily. On the day Enzo died, it rained just as hard outside. I cried until I was lost in despair when suddenly I heard someone speaking to me. Don't be sad, it's cold sitting on the ground. In my days, I couldn't tell whether it was Enzo or Marcos. Those days without Enzo. I don't know how I got through them. I only remember that. Marcos often came to see me. He would hold me in his arms and softly comfort me. Ignoring others' objections, he stayed with me. At that time, Marcos was full of spirit, loving me almost to madness. On the day of the wedding, he loudly told me that he would treat me well for a lifetime. These moments seem so vivid. Perhaps at that time, we really loved each other. But our feelings couldn't withstand the test of time. My soul just floated in the air, lost and alone. And Marcos seemed like a different person. He ran to the bottom of the apartment building, right below the bedroom window. In that viewing pool, Marcos desperately searched for that ring. The young master of the Olson family disregarded his image, braving the storm, just to find the ring he once threw away himself. Just like how I had begged him in the rain not to divorce me. Karma has its way, this taste should belong to Marcos now. The water was almost up to his waist. Marcos bent down, his head submerged in the water, searching for that ring. But after searching all night, he still couldn't find the ring he had thrown out of the window. Exhausted, he lay on the ground, every part of him soaked. Not long after, my affair with Marcos was exposed by the media, along with Charlene Barber. A photo of him rushing me into the hospital was captured by paparazzi. And that shot of him searching for the ring in the rain was also taken. The internet was flooded with insults directed at Marcos and Charlene. There were also netizens defending me. How desperate she must have been before she died. I remember their wedding a few years ago that made national headlines. Yeah, they once loved each other so much, how could they not love anymore? I remember Felicia Holland was once with Enzo Olson, it's just that Enzo died. Did he put in all that effort just to torment her? What a beast. It's really karma, it should be Marcos's turn now. I saw these comments, and so did Marcos. He frantically dug through every trace of the love he once had. All were in that storage box, looking at each piece one by one. He started searching the room for traces of me, trying to prove that I loved him. Marcos knelt on the ground looking for a strand of my hair, looking utterly disheveled. Finally, he found a strand of my long hair. Marcos carefully placed it in a box, storing it high up. Sometimes he would hold my clothes close, desperately inhaling their scent. But Marcos still refused to sign the divorce agreement. Even though I had been declared dead legally. He began to talk crazily. Enzo has come back to life, he wants to come back and take my wife. Felicia is my wife, she will always be my wife. No one believed his words, just like he hadn't believed me back then. He would often pull out our marriage certificate and stare at it in a daze. During this time, Charlene contacted him once. She said the public opinion was too overwhelming and she could no longer live normally. She wanted Marcos to spend money to suppress the trending topic. She even became more demanding. Felicia is already dead, when will we get married? Didn't you promise to marry me? Marcos hung up on her and even hired paparazzi to stake out Charlene's house. He even got several newspapers to report on this matter, forcing Charlene into a corner. Is this what they call dog eat dog? I saw all of this happening. If things continue like this, when will I be able to return to Enzo's side? As long as he doesn't sign the agreement, I won't be able to see Enzo for even a day. It has been a month since I passed away. Marcos's life has gradually returned to its previous tranquility. He goes to work and comes home every day, eating and sleeping on time. It seems like the despondent person from a month ago is no longer him. I thought to myself, some men really do have a strong ability to heal, even if they cried like a baby at the time, eventually time will wash it all away. Moreover, it's only been a month, in another month, he might even forget who Felicia Holland is. I floated in the air, watching Marcos live his life comfortably, feeling a pang of unwillingness. After everything, he could just pack up and leave, while I alone bear the pain. I asked the system, if this goes on, when will Marcos sign the divorce agreement? The system countered, don't you want to see him suffer? Isn't that revenge for you? I looked puzzled. Marcos doesn't look like he's suffering at all, he seems to have let it go. The real show hasn't even started yet, the host must be patient and wait. I remained confused, only able to wait and see. These past few days, Marcos has been busy with work. It seems to be a very important project. He has invested quite a bit of money into it. Pouring in all his effort, he almost has to work overtime every night. Yet I could only watch helplessly, unable to do anything. Mr. Holland, thank you for your support of our company. I hope we can have a pleasant cooperation this time. Marcos stood up respectfully and addressed the elder sitting in the middle. This was already an unknown number of meetings. Several shareholders were sitting together in the conference room, discussing something. I only felt that the old man in the middle with gray hair had a familiar aura, but this was my first time seeing him. Where did you get that necklace? The elder in the middle spoke up. Marcos answered with a hint of sadness in his voice. This? It's a keepsake from my late wife. I often miss her, so I wear her necklace to feel like she's right beside me. I let out a soft laugh. Back then, the affair between Marcos and his mistress had caused quite a stir. Who in the room didn't know what kind of person Marcos was? Only Mr. Holland was kept in the dark. Can I take a look at it? Sure. Marcos quickly took it off and handed it to the person across from him. Mr. Holland examined it carefully, then raised his eyes to look at Marcos. I will definitely visit you at your home, Mr. Olson. You're welcome anytime. Marcos put on a respectful demeanor and stood up to shake hands. But Mr. Holland didn't even glance at him as he turned and walked away, leaving Marcos standing there, at a loss. I wanted to go out and see, but my movement was restricted. I could only follow around Marcos. Anyway, the money is in hand. What's so great about the Holland family? Isn't their daughter dead because of me? Marcos muttered under his breath, but I still heard him. The Holland family's daughter? I understood what he meant. I was the daughter of the Holland family. Since I could remember, I had grown up in an orphanage. I had tried to find my biological parents, but I knew nothing about them. It turned out Marcos had always known about this. From his tone, it seemed he had been secretly preventing me from finding out about my parents. I floated to Marcos's side and shouted in his ear. Why? Why do this to me? After 7 years together, don't you have any feelings at all? I was so anxious I could barely think straight, and reluctantly had to ask the system. What can I do to let the Holland family know their real daughter died at the hands of Marcos? As a ghost, the only way is to appear in a dream. All right. By nightfall, I entered Mr. Holland's dream. A familiar yet unfamiliar person. When he saw the birthmark behind my right ear, he tightly embraced me. For the first time, I felt that there were still people thinking of me in ways I couldn't see. I told him about my experiences over the years, and about my relationship with Marcos. In the dream, he was both warm and furious. He said my parents felt very guilty for losing me. So they searched everywhere for me. In the end, just 2 years after I went missing, they both passed away. Even so, he never gave up looking for me. But as time went on, many things had changed beyond recognition. The chances of finding me became smaller and smaller. I held his hand tightly, listening to him tell these stories. I was no longer a child without love. In places I couldn't see, there were so many people who cared about me. Just that the right people met at the wrong time. My voice was almost hoarse. Grandpa, I'm sorry. I'm already gone from this world. He gently stroked my head and held me close. You will always be my dear granddaughter. Having never felt this kind of affection before, I was now in tears. Marcos, I am not all alone. I have family who loves me. I was once a very happy person, until I met Marcos. I recounted everything word for word. How could this happen? Our family's precious gem is treated like this. I was even planning to invest in Marcos's company. Old Mr. Holland's eyes shifted, and his tone changed. Actually, I felt something was off when I saw Marcos's necklace today, but I didn't have concrete evidence yet. I pulled him close and whispered in his ear. Just in case Grandpa woke up and didn't believe me or forgot. I specifically shared a secret with him, instructing him to go to a certain place after waking up. There, he would be able to verify that everything I said was true. It was the place where my body would lie, a rather inconspicuous private hospital. In the large morgue, I lay in the center, covered with a white cloth. Old Mr. Holland tightened his grip on his cane and slowly approached. But when he reached the front, he hesitated to pull back the white cloth. The dream and reality were about to intertwine in that moment. If the person lying inside was indeed his beloved granddaughter, then everything would be true. He trembled as he pulled back the cloth. Inside lay a face identical to the one from last night's dream. He dared not look at the birthmark behind her ear, only mumbling. I found her, I found my dear granddaughter, let's go home. Grandpa will take revenge for you. On Marcos's side, he was still happily planning this project. It seemed that his dream of making a fortune was about to shatter. Mr. Olson, the Holland Group said they want you to expand the project. They mentioned they could increase their investment by 65%. 65%? Faced with such a huge temptation, Marcos did not hesitate to stake all his savings. But the money was still not enough. He even borrowed a substantial amount. He even claimed that once he made big money, he would pay back both the principal and interest. Marcos was determined to make more money. He invested half of his funds in publicity, heavily promoting the product's effectiveness, while cutting corners on product development. The actual inspection reports were riddled with failures. On the day of the new product launch, Marcos invited bigwigs from various industries. Thank you to everyone here for supporting me. I've invested a lot in this research, just to create a better product. He pointed to the representatives from the Holland Group below. The Holland Group has also increased their investment by 65% based on the original foundation, showing how much importance our product holds. I listened to Marcos's nonsense. This product has anti-wrinkle and whitening properties. Before this, Marcos had already conducted many promotional activities, so this new product launch garnered a lot of public attention. As soon as Marcos finished speaking, the central screen flickered. The originally intended product introduction PPT transformed into the product's inspection report. Using the cheapest materials, the report concluded with the bold letters failed that everyone present saw. Along with images of allergic reactions appeared on the screen. Marcos's face turned red as he shouted angrily. Who put this up? Who did this? Turn it off now. No one answered him, only murmurs filled the room. Several shareholders, seeing this, proposed to withdraw their investments. Someone is slandering me, this isn't the report for this product. Marcos continued to stubbornly explain. If the shareholders withdrew their investments, it meant Marcos would be without funds, he couldn't fill the huge financial gap. Marcos stood alone on the stage. The venue's doors opened, and old Mr. Holland walked in with a group of police officers. Who is Marcos Olson? Marcos trembled as he responded, I am Marcos Olson. Your company is suspected of providing false information and concealing the truth, which falls under the serious circumstances specified in the Cosmetics Supervision and Administration Regulations, and you will face severe penalties and a business shutdown. A series of statements left Marcos dazed. He certainly knew what he was doing was illegal, he just got momentarily blinded by profit. Old tricks are the best. First, my grandpa elevate Marcos to a high position and then bring him crashing down. Moreover, throughout this incident, old Mr. Holland hadn't shown his face, effortlessly bringing Marcos down. Marcos owed a massive sum of money. Even if he had spent lavishly before, he couldn't cover this hole now. Marcos hid in the house all day to escape. I stayed at home with him, so bored that I started counting my own hair. The doorbell suddenly rang, and Marcos just glanced up without moving. There had been too many people asking for money these days, so he could only pretend he wasn't home. Marcos, open the door, I can help you. It was old Mr. Holland's voice. He gently knocked twice on the door. Although Marcos was in a bad place, he wasn't foolish and still opened the door. The two sat in the living room while I floated nearby. I can help you, but you have to agree to one condition. The condition is very simple. What condition? Old Mr. Holland paused for 2 seconds, then said in a dark tone. Debts must be repaid, and a life must be paid for a life. Marcos was startled by this statement, his face turning pale. I don't really understand what you mean. I know everything about what happened between you and her. You owe her, and I'm just asking you to repay her. Is that request unreasonable? I will also pay off the debts you owe. Marcos remained silent, and the room was quiet for 2 minutes. He neither agreed nor refused, he just stayed silent. I quickly floated to Marcos's side and whispered in his ear. Marcos, can you sign the divorce agreement before leaving? I shouted at the top of my lungs, but Marcos couldn't hear a thing. He continued to stay quiet. Another half-month passed, and Marcos was still the same. He hid at home, afraid to go out, sometimes even pulling out our photo album, looking at the memories and shedding tears. At that time, I naively thought Marcos would give up his life, but I was overthinking it. How could a selfish and heartless person give up their life? But I didn't have time to wait any longer. When Marcos fell asleep, I entered his dream. Perhaps it's true that what one thinks about during the day comes to them at night. He dreamed of our wedding. The scene in the dream was so strange, like a vast and absurd world. A desolate wedding, the newlyweds holding hands, numbly walking toward the hall. When Marcos asked me if I was willing to marry him, I hurriedly entered the dream body. I don't want to. Let me go, Marcos. Marcos quickly interrupted me, holding my hand tightly. No, you will always be mine. I was right, Marcos had always been a selfish man. In desperation, I transformed myself into how I looked on the day I died. Marcos, look at me. Can you bear to see me like this? Why don't you tell me about my biological parents when you know? Why do you still hurt me so much when you know I love you? Who will take my grievances for me? I'm so tired. I brought the divorce agreement before him. Marcos still resisted. He threw the divorce agreement away, shouting that he would never sign. Even I was died, you still would not let me go? Marcos held me tightly in his arms, squeezing me so hard it hurt my chest. I love you, I really love you, I can't bear to lose you. Just stay by my side like this, okay? I struggled desperately, looking at him like he was trash. Marcos was so selfish that he wanted me to remain a ghost by his side forever. Just like how no matter what outrageous things he did, I still remained devoted to him. A wave of nausea surged in my heart, and I suddenly slapped Marcos. This is for you. Then I picked up the wine bottle on the table and knocked Marcos out. If being gentle doesn't work, then I'll be harsh. The system only said to make Marcos sign the divorce agreement. But it didn't say it had to be voluntary. I held his hand and carefully signed Marcos's name on the divorce agreement. Then I signed my name. I felt my body gradually becoming transparent, slowly drifting up into the sky. Marcos lay on the ground, still murmuring my name. From now on, anything related to me will slowly disappear. The system will erase all traces of me. Of course, memories cannot be erased. Let Marcos live forever in pain and guilt. I have completely disappeared from this world. Marcos seemed to sense it too, after waking from the dream. He got out of bed and dug out the box that contained my hair. Inside, there was only a single hair that was gradually becoming transparent. He wanted to grasp it to prevent it from disappearing. But the result was the opposite. The things inside the box were slowly vanishing, along with the box itself. He screamed like a madman, calling out my name, as if he wanted to summon me back into his cage, making it hard for anyone to breathe. Marcos's love was selfish, it was frightening. In that moment, Marcos realized that he had completely lost me. He had lost someone who once loved him. At that moment, Marcos finally awakened. But I could no longer see him, could not see his disheveled state. Because I was about to go to another world. I recalled the various moments from the past. If only I had discovered it a bit earlier. Our story, Marcos and I. I chose to forget it in the river of time. Since I couldn't fight against time, I would wait for time to heal. After 10 years, I saw Enzo Olson again. He was no longer as haggard and thin as he had been before he got sick. A healthy and complete Enzo stood before me. I still couldn't believe it, I was afraid this was a dream. So I kept asking him who he was, asking him to pinch my face. Ouch, that hurts. Then I burst into giggles. As I laughed, I started to cry. At that moment, all the grievances I had suffered were worth it. I called him a big liar. Clearly, he had been in so much pain. Yet he lied to me, saying he wasn't hurting, and asked me to forget him. Enzo took me to the entrance of a shop. It was a flower shop, named FNE. He said he had never forgotten me. We had planned to open a flower shop together, but before we could, Enzo fell ill. On the night he received the diagnosis, he didn't sleep at all. He even wanted to hide it from me until the illness reached its late stage. I found Enzo in the hospital, his body covered in tubes. He had lost so much weight, but he was still so gentle. The first thing he said when he saw me was, "Am I scaring you like this?" I didn't recognize this version of Enzo. The vibrant and competitive man seemed to have gotten lost. I couldn't find him. All that was left was a frail body on the hospital bed. He had once been such a lively person. Yet he was tortured to the point of being unrecognizable by his illness. I had questioned God countless times. Such a vibrant person. Why? Fortunately, Enzo is now back to his complete self, right by my side. After all the twists and turns, it's us again. He said he wanted to raise a mini version of me, and then we had a lovely daughter. We also planted a lot of flowers in the yard. I often sigh that I can meet Enzo again. Is it because God thinks we've suffered too much? That day, I was gardening in the yard when a newspaper blew to my feet. I picked it up to take a look. The headline read, "The Olson Group's only heir jumps into the pool and takes his own life." No more heirs for the Olson Group. Just as I was about to read further, my daughter came back from school, calling out for me in her sweet voice. "Mommy, I'm back!" I tossed the newspaper aside and hurriedly picked up my daughter. "What do you want to eat tonight?" "Mommy will cook for you and Daddy." The newspaper lay quietly in the corner.